And we can see in the world today there's a spirit of Antichrist going against Christ, against the church. It finally achieves its form, its incarnation, like it was before, and it's one man who will come at the end and do many of the very same things that Christ did. It will be some kind of demonic marvel.
Well, hello, friends. Good evening. Welcome to the Reversion. We're going to be doing a long overdue deep dive this evening, so I hope you guys are nice and comfy, got a cup of tea, cup of decaf coffee, whatever it is you enjoy in the evenings. I'm Anthony Westgate. It's great to have you guys here. We got all the great friends here in the chat. Crispy, Heidi, cool dude, cake in a cup, blue Skittle, let's go. See Billheim there, what's up? So yeah, we're going to be getting into basically the start of what most scholars agree is the definitive start of the transmission of Western esotericism, especially as it relates to the Christian world, the heterodox Christian world, that is. But, this does actually end up in some Russian academic circles by the early 20th century. We're not going to be getting into that. But, people love to point out like, oh, this ended up infiltrating Orthodoxy too. Not nearly to the degree that it did for the Church of Rome, as we'll see. There was a very short-lived trend with some of the Russian intellectuals as it pertains to sophiology. But yeah, that's for another topic. But what I guess I'll do to introduce you guys to this, if you're not familiar, a little bit of a teaser here. So if it'll switch scenes here, what the heck? Here we go. Okay. So what we're looking at here is Hermes Trismegistus on the floor. This is a floor mosaic in the Cathedral of Siena in Italy. Now, if you're not familiar with who this figure Hermes Trismegistus is, you're going to be learning about that tonight. But this is the mythical Egyptian sage that the Hermetic tradition is based on. And so you may be wondering, how did this end up in a cathedral in Italy, Catholic cathedral? Another one here. So here's Hermes depicted in the this is the Borgia Apartments in I believe this is in Venice, if I'm not mistaken, in Italy. You can see more of that here. This is a famous series of frescoes painted by Petrino. I think Petrino, is that his name? And yeah, you can see a bunch of them here. There's Isis is depicted in one of these. I think this one here. So you see Isis depicted with the Borgia Pope. And this is I forget what the name of this god is, Lo or something like that. It's some kind of Egyptian depiction of a bull. But we're going to get into like what this all means. And then, of course, this here. How did this happen? How did Pope Leo X end up approving the Talmud to be printed? Right? All this wild stuff that happened during the Renaissance. So we're going to be looking at how did this occult virus, as Michael Hoffman calls it, end up entering Catholic humanist circles in the Renaissance, at the height of the Renaissance. So, we got, thank you very much for him, by him 247. What's the name of the vaporwave sounding song in the beginning? That is, it's called I think it's called I Wear Your Ring by the Cocktail Twins. Fantastic group from the early 90s. It's not a vaporwave song. It's just one of their songs slowed down. But it's a shoegaze band. Glad you like it, though. What's up, cool dude? Thank you for the 5. I've always been a bit of an outsider weirdo conspiracy bro, but only Orthodoxy and St. Seraphim Rose helped me to put the spiritual pieces together. Bless. Well, we're going to get into Father Seraphim Rose here, actually, because I think another good introduction to all this is to read what some of our modern saints have said about the Renaissance. Because a question I get very often, especially as it pertains to my work on following this transmission of Western esotericism through various Protestant millenarian groups, is that, people will ask, like, why this seems really substantial, because, like, this essentially was a major factor in contributing to building the modern world, essentially. And they'll ask, like, why haven't I read about this in any, like, Orthodox resources or anything like that? How come none of our modern saints have covered this transmission? I think, there's maybe a handful of reasons I've came up with over the last few years. And I think the primary one is just simply that it kind of like doesn't, pertain to, it doesn't pertain to the East. Like I said, there was a very small and inconsequential trend during the early 20th century, during the Silver Age in Russia, where you saw kind of this emergence of Sophiology. It was shut down pretty fast, but as far as I know, but it's not really. I guess that's all I can come up with. Really, is like the primary reason. Doesn't really pertain. This didn't impact the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, but nevertheless, we do have quite a lot of, I think, criticisms of the Renaissance period. And so you can see, for example, I have here, this is the Orthodox Survival Course. Father Seraphim Rose delivered an entire lecture, lecture 3 of the Orthodox Survival Course, titled The Renaissance. So you should definitely read this, or I believe you can probably listen to the audio lectures on YouTube. Fantastic lecture series. I highly recommend. He follows the entire current of modernism from the Middle Ages to the 20th century. So he pulls from all these, primary sources, is really well researched, but, of course, this was delivered as a lecture. It's not it wasn't meant to be written and published. But I'm very glad that we do have a published version of it. So I'll just read some of the stuff that he says here. And he's basically calling that what he's following is what he calls the new Christianity. This is like the emergence of the new Christianity. He does frame a lot within the Middle Ages, so it's important to understand some of the figures in the Middle Ages, such as Joachim of Fiore, who came up with this whole tripartite model of eschatology, where there's like an age of the Father, age of the Son, age of the Holy Spirit. And I believe as it gets closer to the Reformation, people start to view the Reformation itself as like the introduction to the age of the Spirit, like the introducing like this new age of the church or whatever. I think if I'm not mistaken, there's the second age of the Son where there's something to do, or maybe that's the first age. I don't remember. I'm not very well versed in Joachimite eschatology. But I believe one of them involves like the schism or something, or at least this is how people interpreted them throughout history, right? There's all different kinds of interpretations of Joachimite eschatology. But anyway, he does like frame all of that, right? So he's saying here that there's nothing that we would call new, because once Christianity has been proclaimed, once Christ has established his church, there is nothing more that can be new. This is the preparation for the end of the world, and people who are penetrated by the principles of Orthodox tradition do not expect anything new in this world. So, one of the common criticisms we get that I love is like, you'll hear people say, if they do know anything about Orthodoxy, they might say something like, oh, you guys are stuck in like the 7th century or something. It's like, yeah, good. That's based. Like, yeah, it's good to be frozen in time, isn't it? So, and then another thing he says, and it was natural that at this period, Western man turned away from the church to pagan Greece and Rome, the monuments of which were all over the West and especially in Italy. And one writer has even said that at this period, pagan Greece and Rome had their revenge on Christianity, because that pagan, antique, ancient civilization had been overthrown by Christianity. The ancient pagan ancient pagan civilization, which placed man first, was first overthrown by Christianity. And now when reason turned against Christianity, this ancient paganism had its revenge on Christianity, being united with reason. And it is in turn this paganism that gave a great impetus, a great push to an ideal of total worldliness. And so that's what we're going to see. What he's alluding to here is what we're going to be covering. He doesn't really actually get that deep into like what occurred in terms of this occult infiltration. But they do attribute, there's quite a lot of criticisms about humanism and about this kind of return to this Gnostic paganism of the ancient world, which it very much was. So when we're looking at the three currents that were syncretized, the esoteric traditions that were syncretized in the Renaissance, you're talking about Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Kabbalah. All three of those really are just different expressions. I'm speaking generally here. They're just kind of different, the same strain of Gnosticism that is just expressed in like different kind of ancient contexts. And so let me catch up on some of the very kind donations here. I asked dumb questions. Let's go, man. Our boy is here in the chat. Father Seraphim's Orthodox Survival Course goes very in-depth on the Renaissance and the murderous spirit behind it. Thank you for the stream. Yeah, exactly. I would assume that came in before I started reading that. Based Westgate just posted the OSC PDF and YouTube playlist of it in general chat for the bro. Yeah, thank you. I think I've had it there. This was, I think, the second or third book we read in the book club. So we went through this. You can go on my Substack. And most of these are paywalled, so it's a really good reason. You'll get your $9 worth, I would say, just by getting access to all the episodes where we covered the Orthodox Survival Course in the book club. We went through every single lecture. So there's, a good 10 to 12 hours of content just for the Orthodox Survival Course. So $9 a month, pretty good deal, I think. He also says, and this is extremely far away from orthodoxy, where even the icon painters usually don't even sign their names. And so he's talking about like the Renaissance art. And it's not just a matter of complete anonymity, because we sometimes find the hymns in the church books, for example, say this is written by a certain Germanus the monk or something like that. But there is no desire to establish oneself as a great poet, a great writer, a great icon painter who puts one's name. So one's name will astonish one's contemporaries. One enters into the tradition, carries on the tradition that has been before. Yeah. And so he's saying that this was another thing that you start to see emerge in the Renaissance, was that there's this notion of notoriety for the individual. Like you start to see the rise of like individual fame through the arts and things like that, and science, right? The paintings, the religious paintings start to carry with them an artist who takes liberties with the expression. So, there's a lot. I think he does a whole lecture just on how you can see visually in the artwork during the Renaissance how there was this very clear visual break from the iconographic tradition. If it wasn't there before in the Middle Ages, you start to really see it in the Renaissance, where these artists are starting to use their mistresses, for example, to depict the Virgin Mary, like some really just wild stuff. Of course, all the naked babies and whatnot, lots of nudity and like questionable stuff. We're actually going to look at a few of these, and this is one more quote I'll read from this. There's a lot in here. I don't want to get too carried away with it, because we're not just looking at Father Seraphim Rose, but he does comment here on the rivalry between the Borgia popes and the Medici popes. So he says, of course, we know the history of the history of the Italian princedoms of this period, with the infamous de Medicis, who even had popes among them who are poisoning each other and killing off their families. So you start to basically see like the early form of a mafia starting like in the Vatican among the popes and the rival families. The Medicis, of course, were like, think of the Medicis as the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds of Italy, or maybe of all of Europe, because they were they were the biggest bank in Europe. Like they were a banking family who also had, papal power. And the Medicis, by the way, basically funded, I think it was Cosimo de' Medici, and then his son and successor, Lorenzo, they effectively funded the entire Renaissance. And so they funded not only the art, culture, like the architecture, all the stuff we know of the Renaissance, all the beauty of the Renaissance that we know of, right? But they also funded what's now known as the Laurentian Library, which I think at the time, it started out as the de' Medici family library. And at the time, it was one of the, if not the most, the largest library in all of Europe, I believe. And it was a private library owned by this Medici banking family. And so, we're going to look at how that actually connects in a very significant way to the beginning of this transmission of Western esotericism in the Christian world. So, another one I'll read here, and then we'll move on, because I think he gets into science and stuff, which we're not going to get too into science right now. But he says, both humanism and Protestantism continue the work of scholasticism and Francis of Assisi, the search to improve on orthodoxy, to improve on Christianity as it had been handed down in the tradition. So they are continuing this work of Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. Of course, the Grand Inquisitor is a critique of the papacy. Both humanism and Protestantism are stages in the destruction of the Christian worldview. And we're going to see here another great text that we also read this in the book club early on, I think last year maybe, maybe 2 years ago, I don't remember. But this is St. Justin Popovich, Orthodox Faith and Life in Christ by St. Justin Popovich. Fantastic read, especially if you're interested in ecclesiology, but like it's more of he's describing like the incarnational nature of the church. He does a lot of work to explain that, and it's as it pertains to Orthodox anthropology. But he says here there's a lot of criticisms throughout this text about Western heterodox Christianity. So he's criticizing the Pope. This is where this famous quote comes from, that every Protestant is their own Pope, and that the Pope was the first Protestant. That comes from this text here. And so he says here, in criticizing humanism, he says, in the history of the human race, there have been three principal falls: that of Adam, that of Judas, and that of the Pope. The principal characteristics of falling into sin is always the same: wanting to be good for one's own sake, wanting to be perfect for one's own sake, wanting to be God for one's own sake. In this manner, however, man unconsciously equates himself to the devil, because the devil also wanted to become God for his own sake, to put himself in the place of God. And that is a fantastic quote that encompasses this whole effort that we're talking about here, with all this esoteric syncretism that we see emerge in the Renaissance, because it all involves, like you're going to see, basically apotheosis. It's like this theurgic attempt to place man in the seat of God, and placing man as an equal with God almost. And we're going to see actually, well, one of the images I showed you from the frescoes in the Borgia apartments, I think it's this one here. I'm not sure if it's this one, or I read one of the captions that said it's basically placing the Pope as a co-equal with God himself. And then of course, like Hermes Trismegistus is there for whatever reason. So, okay, we got another one from IS Dumb Questions. Thank you again, brother, for the $10. Orsini family is still going strong in the mafia and the church. Yep. Yeah. I mean, in the book club this year, we had Jay Dyer join us to talk about Operation Gladio, because we read that book. And so you see that with Operation Gladio, with this Masonic infiltration in the Vatican, when you understand that when you understand what happened during the Renaissance, you realize, like, Nostra Aetate, right? Vatican II, even Vatican I to some extent, but definitely more so Vatican II, like the modernism, all this stuff in the Catholic Church today, it didn't emerge out of a vacuum. It's like, and we're going to be looking a lot at Michael Hoffman's text, the Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, and actually maybe what I'll do, and then we'll actually get into the material here, is I'll show you guys some of the books that I'm going to be pulling from. I'm going to actually, let me see if I have this set up. Yeah. This is going to be a rare moment on the stream here, and I'm going to pull up my cam. Not to face docs, but let's see here. So, okay. Okay, there we go. So this is the text, the Occult Renaissance book, the Occult Renaissance Church of Rome. Shout out to Andrew, who sent this to me in the mail. He had an extra copy, brand new copy sent to me. So I'm very appreciative of him sending me this book, because it's quite expensive and I've been wanting it for a while. And I really dug through this a lot, and I'm definitely using it in my research. But this is a really interesting text, because Hoffman is arguing essentially that this was all a conspiracy, that there was a concerted effort to infiltrate the Vatican with occultism. And I'll show you just like the table of contents are pretty interesting. So he starts out with, Neoplatonic Hermeticism, right? And that's what we're going to start with here. I don't know how much of this, so I'm like halfway done with this. I would like to maybe cover some of the stuff that's in the first half, but I have no idea how far we're going to get tonight. We'll see. So yeah, like he's basically arguing that he uses a lot of really inflammatory language, not in like a vulgar sense, but like he's very critical of these figures during this time. And there's a lot of debate over like what is, like I've talked to some traditional Catholics about Hoffman, and they don't like him because they think he's it's hard to like pin down what exactly he is, because he is a Catholic. He's almost like what I would describe Hoffman's worldview as is he's almost like a trad cath, but if it were to apply to like, he's almost like a sedevacantist if it were applied instead of Vatican II, it were applied to the Renaissance. So like it seems to me, I could be wrong, but just from reading this, it seems to me that he believes that during the Renaissance, there was this parallel church that formed, something like that. Because he does a lot to like draw in modern examples of stuff, especially with like Pope Francis. That actually explains a lot. And you can see here, he's got a lot of images that are pretty cool. So there's the, what I showed earlier. There's Hermes Trismegistus on the floor of the Siena Cathedral. There's so he's describing it here. It's Hermes Trismegistus in the center. You have Pope Alexander the Sixth, and we're going to get into him. He's an interesting guy. He's known as the occult pope, and guardian. So Hermes Trismegistus, guardian deity of the papal apartment of Pope Alexander the Sixth. So Pope Alexander is who commissioned those frescoes to be painted. And then you have Pico della Mirandola, who I've talked about a good deal on this channel. And there's Johannes Reuchlin, who I've also talked about quite a bit. It was kind of, both of these figures were kind of like forerunners to the Reformation. And then here you have the papal edition of the Talmud. There you go. At the time of its publication, this was the finest edition of the Babylonian Talmud in world history. This printing under the auspices of the Pope established the text within the canon of rabbinic Judaism for generations to come. So this is from the Bomberg printing press. That whole format of the text in the Talmud was established by Daniel Bomberg, which was a Vatican-funded print shop. And that's like, that literally set the print tradition of the Talmud to this day. Like you look at any modern printed edition of the Talmud and it's got the same type of, typeset and everything with the commentaries on the side and the text in the middle. So pretty cool pictures here. I mean, not cool in the sense that it's like based, but it's like good visuals to see that, how that look at this art, man. Like what the hell is going on? This is a funny caption. He goes, "This painting begs the question, what was Michelangelo's Eve doing before she turned her head?" Yeah, there's a lot of like sexual undertones in these paintings, but and then he gets a lot into like the obelisks, like why are there these obelisks in the Vatican? Looks like the Washington Memorial, doesn't it? So this is Domenico Fontana, the brilliant engineer whom Sixtus V entrusted the mission of moving an obelisk to St. Peter's Square. He is pictured holding a replica. Oh boy, that might get TOS for these. Yeah, there you go. There's the one in the Capitol. So you can see that, this does read as a conspiratorial text, but he does draw from a ton of primary sources. So it's a good text to have if you're interested in this subject. Another one. Now this isn't exclusively about the Renaissance, but E. Michael Jones in The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit has a whole chapter on Rome discovers the Talmud that covers a lot of this. So this is another one. This is pretty expensive because it's 3 volumes, but this one definitely piqued my interest in this subject, in just this one chapter here. And then of course, there's Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition by Dame Frances Yates. This is kind of I would say the essential text for this subject. Frances Yates was groundbreaking in her research on the Western esoteric tradition, and especially on the Renaissance period. And so a lot of, Hoffman is citing from here a lot, and among her other work as well. But yeah, this is a crucial text. Also has some interesting images, as you can see. But this one, I'm starting to look, same stuff, right? Showing the same images. This one I would say this was my introduction to this subject. When I read this, I didn't understand about 75% of what she was talking about, maybe even more. And the more I go back to it, the more I'm understanding now. And then this one's called Alchemy of the Word, Kabbalah of the Renaissance. It's another academic text. And I would say the first 2 chapters are worthwhile. But the thing is, these texts are all kind of covering the same thing. After some time, it just does get a bit redundant. You're just seeing these authors like describe things in different wording, but it's like all the same events they're covering. And then there's this here, which again, we're not going to get into the science part on this stream, but this is a pretty cool text that talks about the same stuff, but how it pertains to the scientific revolution, the occult sciences in the Renaissance. And then this one more, which is obviously it's not about the Renaissance, but you're going to see why this is relevant. City of God. So with that said, let me switch back over to the text here. Thank you for the donations, guys. Sorry, I'm not, I got to catch up on chat. I haven't been looking at the chat. My bad. Who is Hoffman? Michael Hoffman. He's you guys should really follow Michael Hoffman. If you enjoy my work, you need to follow Michael Hoffman. He's done fantastic research especially on like conspiracies and stuff. He's like, yeah, fairly based in red pill on many issues. Yeah. They don't like Hoffman. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, the Catholics don't like him. But even though he's Catholic, I mean, he does, like, to be fair, like, he does take a lot of liberties with his interpretation of things. So I wouldn't consider Occult Renaissance Church of Rome exactly an academic text, although he's drawing from academic sources and primary sources. It just doesn't read like one because it's very opinionated. But there's some, there's some truth. Like I'm not sure if I agree that the entire thing was a conspiracy. I think it is a little more nuanced than that, but there are times where this does seem like it was a concerted effort. And at least at the start of it, it did. Which I'm going to get into here. Like, let me actually get into the subject, and we're going to cover how this occult virus, as Hoffman calls it, entered Thank you. Static Age, what's up, man? Static Age was in the in Tony's stream last night, which I really enjoyed. Thank you for the $2. Thank you for the $2 there. Zinfidel, what's up, dude? The first Freemason Christianity. Yeah. Well, E. Michael Jones does too, but Hoffman kind of alludes to that. And actually, with that said, let's actually get into this here because there's actually still a few more books, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. This is a little write-up about Francis Yates, and this is from Joseph Farrell's book, Thrice Great Hermetica in the Janus Age. I believe he was Orthodox at one time. I'm not sure what his status is. I heard he's possibly apostatized or something. I hope not. But he at least at some point was Orthodox, I think, when he was writing these. And then there's this is Ordo Ab Chao, Volume 1 by what's this guy's name? David Livingstone. And so yeah, let's let me see, where should I start here? Let me pull up Hoffman's text. This is a big file, so I hope it doesn't crash anything. So yeah, you can see here, he says that it was Catholic Neoplatonic Hermeticism that was the seedbed of Rosicrucianism. And that's a quote from Mackintosh, another great source. He's a specialist on the Rosicrucians. I might not have, I might just riff. I don't know if I want to go off a text. I'll just kind of like pull stuff up as I'm going. But let's start with how this entered, right? So you need to understand, just like with anything in history, that there was you need to understand like the cultural context, right? So what was the cultural context during the Renaissance? You had a lot of apocalyptic attitudes and speculation and anxiety, right? Because what occurred within 50 years of the Renaissance, within probably actually like about 30 years while it was going on, you had the fall of Constantinople. So what happened was, Constantinople fell, and you have all these monks and intellectuals fleeing the Byzantine Empire with all of their ancient preserved Greek text. There are all these manuscripts. And, I talked a little bit about the Medicis, right? So you had the Medici Pope at the time, you had the de facto ruler of Florence, who was Cosimo de' Medici. And you can see him, that's Plathan. I don't know if I have a picture of de' Medici. Yeah, here. So this is Cosimo de' Medici. So like I said, he funded the entire Renaissance, and he was basically employing all of these book hunting monks to go and scour European monasteries for these ancient texts. And what happened was one of these monks, and I think he has a name. Let me see here. I think that he's named, I think, by Yates, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just get up my text. I'm sorry, guys, if I'm not like as engaging with the chat tonight, because I'm like looking at all this text. But okay, so you have what was his name? It doesn't really matter his name, but we do have a record of the monk's name. Anyway, there was a monk that brought back with him to Florence the Corpus Hermeticum. And the Corpus Hermeticum is this, I think it's 12 manuscripts. So it's a collection, a compilation of manuscripts that were perceived to be of ancient origin by this mythical sage, Egyptian sage known as Hermes Trismegistus. And that is this guy here. I'm sure maybe some of you have seen this image. This is Hermes Trismegistus, also depicted here, right under this globe here. Sorry, I'm clicking around. Yeah. So see how he's holding the same globe. And, this actually ties in a lot with like modern cosmology too. If you're not already catching up, picking up on that, that'll be a whole other stream. If you want to check out some of my work on that, if you go to the Reversion, one of my more popular articles is on this. I think it's, what is it? What did I call it? Yeah, this one here. I haven't looked at this in a while. Astral Magic, the Occult Religion of Modern Cosmology. So I go into detail on this one. I'll link this in the chat if you wanted to read more on this. If you're interested in like the cosmology aspect of this. And so yeah, that's Hermes Trismegistus. Again, same figure on the mosaic of the Cathedral of Siena. And so Cosimo de' Medici is in the last days of his life. He's towards the end of his life. He's an old man. And this Corpus Hermeticum arrives in Florence. Again, remember, he's the de facto ruler of Florence. And he's running this Platonic Academy that was headed by his patron Marsilio Ficino, and they were basically working to revive Neoplatonism in the Renaissance. And when the Corpus Hermeticum arrives in Florence, Cosimo de' Medici treats it with such urgency that he has Ficino stop his translation of the Platonic corpus and instead translate the Corpus Hermeticum. So this is how important it was. They had an entire Platonic Academy that was like the intellectual like think tank basically of the Renaissance, and this seemingly ancient text arrives that dates back. By the way, something I didn't mention about Hermes Trismegistus, he was believed to be a contemporary of Moses. So this was, they thought this was like the most ancient wisdom that they had just uncovered. And so there was a great urgency to translate the Corpus Hermeticum into Latin. And so how did this even become so urgent? Well, you would have to know, again, remember I said there was like this apocalyptic attitude. So you had the fall of Constantinople. Everyone's like, this is it. Like Christendom is coming to an end. And this is where you start to see it's literally at the beginning of the transmission of Western esotericism that it's propelled forward by apocalyptic urgency. And it's remained that way until this day. Right. And so there's this whole like kind of mad dash to, disseminate all this seemingly ancient esoterica throughout Europe. And how this started was there was, so you had the fall of Constantinople, and then there was also the, this Byzantine philosopher, Gemostus Platon, who was considered the second Plato. And he was a Byzantine philosopher, and he was known as the last of the Hellenes and the first of modern Greek. And so there was a failed attempt to heal the Great Schism. This was during the Council of Florence, 1438 to I think it was about a year, 1438 to 1439. And Platon, this is where he introduced his manifesto, which is called the Nomoi, which he kept largely secret during his lifetime. And in this book contained all these demonic Gnostic heresies that also contained prayers to these, Hellenic deities, and had a calendar of pagan festivals. And do I have a picture of Platon? I thought I had one of him somewhere. Yeah, here he is. So Platon's this guy here. So you can see he's kind of wearing like the Byzantine garb, right? On the left. Kind of a goofy painting, but and he's at the Platonic Academy. I think one of these guys might be Ficino, if I'm not mistaken. But this is depicting the Platonic Academy, and so he was like kind of the founder of it. And this is where you see a secret. Essentially, he forms a secret society. So the Platonic Academy is very much operating like a secret society that is, like I said, the think tank of the Renaissance. And so there was this Council of Florence. They tried to heal the schism. So you have this already. You see this effort of like ecumenism, right? And basically he delivered this blueprint within his manifesto. He had a whole blueprint for like this pagan utopia that was going to be governed by philosophical religious brotherhood. They anticipated this European secret order that was similar to like the Illuminati. Sorry, my dog's barking over there. And so failed attempt to heal the schism, along with the, this was not long after, or I guess the Council of Florence was just before the fall of Constantinople. So I got the timeline a little bit mixed up there. So this was just before the fall of Constantinople. So any attempt to heal the schism was basically dissolved after the Byzantine Empire collapsed. And so by the early 1460s, this Nomoi manuscript that Platon put together, this manifesto, was passed on to Gennadios II, Gennadios Scholarios, who was the first patriarch of Constantinople under Ottoman rule. And after reading Platon's manifesto, he decides to burn all but the chapter headings and excerpts that were sufficient enough to justify its burning. So he basically just, like, that's how demonic this was. I didn't read it, but I don't even know if we have access to it anymore. But it was apparently so bad that you could just tell just by the chapter headings, essentially, like what was going on. And so the Orthodox authorities, they legitimized this. This was like a form of censorship. It was book burning. It was good book burning, right? He was correct to do it. And this is another thing. I talked about book burnings last stream. I won't get too into that. But you do see this thread coinciding with the spread of esoterica throughout the West, with like a trail. It leaves a trail behind it of book burnings. And whether the book burnings are in favor of the, guarding the esoterica, or an attempt to stop it from disseminating completely by destroying the knowledge within. And so yeah, I went a little bit out of order with the timeline there, but you had fall of Constantinople. Everyone gets this apocalyptic kind of fervor and attitude, thinking that this is the end of Christendom. Then you have, you had the Council of Florence, Platonic Academy form, fall of Constantinople, and then you have the discovery of the Hermetic corpus. So I'd be a bad lecturer because I don't always have the timeline correct. So anyway, and I am publishing an article about this that will have all the timeline laid out. This is just off the top of my dome here. Let me catch up on chat. I'm trying to not ignore you guys. I'm sorry. Oh, and we're also over on Substack. So hello to all the Substack viewers over there. Tell dog hello, and they're a good dog. Yeah, well, she's sometimes a good dog. Pup speaking Latin. Yeah. Everyone knows when you hear the doggo spurging, it's time to end the stream. But she's just spurging for no reason right now. So anyway, where are we here in the timeline? So that's basically that is the formal introduction to this esoteric transmission in the West. There was things that occurred before this, but again, most scholars point to the Reformation, point to that event as like the more definitive beginning of this chain of transmission that, obviously makes its way into the Reformation as well. Hoffman talks about that. See if I can pull that up. My scene switching is not working right now. I don't know why. Hang on a sec. Why is this? Okay, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So I think he says that somewhere. What page are we at? See, I maybe I should consult my physical text because I have everything noted there, but then I just get way too fixated on it. Oh my gosh, stop. Yeah, I'm not. It takes so long to search through this text, so I'm not going to bother. But yeah, he echoes that sentiment. Actually, Hoffman. One of the things that kind of frustrated me about Hoffman was he's very sympathetic to the Reformers and to the Reformation in general. Of course, his take is that the Catholic Church is much more to blame for all this than the Protestants who became the primary disseminators of the esoteric tradition around from the 17th century to the 19th century, basically, at least in my opinion. So even though the Protestants did more work throughout time to spread this influence, Hoffman is still sympathetic to them and really just putting all the blame on the Catholic Church. Which, sure, a case could be made for that. It's not something I don't think I would debate it, but, he's just very much more harsh on the Catholic Church and is very, when he can, he takes the opportunity to almost make an apology for the Reformers in many cases. So, very sympathetic to Luther as well and all this stuff. So, yeah, sorry about the pup there. She'll stop. She just wants attention. Yeah, the dog heard you mention the Talmud. So anyway, there's like a quote somewhere. I think Hoffman. Okay, yeah, here's the Hoffman quote. He says, to claim it was Protestants who originated the occult infiltration of Christendom when it was the Church of Rome which had pioneered it is a shameless act of misdirection and scapegoating that compounds the trail of deceit. Like, he's right about that, because you can't just like assume that this started with the Protestants. Like it was there, it was present before the Reformation. It actually helps you to understand the Reformation better, knowing that this transmission was already in effect. It helps you to understand, and then also the apocalyptic aspect too, right? So what was the other apocalyptic event that happened during the Renaissance, right? You had the fall of Constantinople, the introduction of the esoteric tradition into the West, and then at the same time, a little bit later, towards the close of the 15th century, 1492. What happened in 1492? 1492, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, who attributed, he wrote in his diary to Isabella that he believed that when he discovered the Americas, he would find enough gold to rebuild the Temple of Solomon, right? So you see like this Masonic kind of effort, even with Columbus before he even set sail on his voyage. And then also, interestingly, I just learned this from, of all things, the novel we're reading, Loris, that we're reading in the book club. He just mentions this in passing, that the year 1492 on the Byzantine calendar is the year 7,000 years since the creation of the earth, creation of everything, creation of everything, God's creating the universe, right? And so, there's 1492 was also, as you can imagine, fostered very apocalyptic attitudes with, and that's where you start to see both the Jews and the Christians in their own right accelerate this, effort to basically usher in the eschaton. With the Jews through Messianism and revolutionary movements, and then you have with the heterodox world there, you start to see a lot of emergence of like prophecies and things like this. You see, we're going to see if we can get to it, at the close of the 15th century, we're going to see a figure who was like very apocalyptic and prophetic. So Cosimo de' Medici, he has Ficino rush to translate the Hermetic Corpus. He doesn't finish the translation in time for Cosimo to read it in full. He ends up dying before Ficino finishes it, and he finished it with haste. He did so within a couple months, I believe. So, brilliant. These are brilliant figures. Let's not tiptoe around it. Like, these guys were very good at what they did. They were at the higher echelons of society in the Renaissance. So, so what motivated all this? There was, all this syncretism. What motivated this attitude to even like rush to translate the Hermetic Corpus over Plato's work? Well, there was this doctrine. You guys may be familiar with this. There's it pretty much motivated the entire Renaissance. It was kind of like the mantra of the Renaissance, like the statement that they championed, especially among the humanists, which was Prisca Theologia. Prisca Theologia means most ancient. Literal translation, I think, is ancient theology. And this is explained in great detail in Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic tradition. Oh, and I just pulled this up here. Here's a passage about this. It is Ficino himself who tells us this, and he's talking about the 1460 event here. I should have read this instead of yapping about it. But this is explaining how the Hermetic Corpus arrived in Florence. And so she's saying it is Ficino himself who tells us this, and that dedication to Lorenzo de' Medici of the Plotinus commentaries, in which he describes the impetus given to Greek studies by the coming of Gemistus Plato and the other Byzantine scholars to the Council of Florence, and how he was commissioned by Cosimo to translate the treasures of Greek philosophy now coming into the West from Byzantium. Now, what were they doing in Byzantium? Like, why did they have like these ancient Hermetic manuscripts in Byzantium? Well, I believe they were just preserving them. It was, this was like massive Greek libraries. They just held within them all these ancient texts. Really that simple. So in a sense, they were guarding it. So this is another thing, a point that I like to highlight, is that a lesser known consequence of the fall of Constantinople was that it essentially released all of this guarded esoterica into the West. Because, like I said, these guys, all these intellectuals that were preserving these manuscripts ended up fleeing, and then Cosimo de' Medici has all these ancient agents go out to collect all these manuscripts, right? I need to keep this moving because I'm never going to get through this if I keep yapping like this. So this is what motivated it. It was Prisca Theologia. I believe it was Ficino who first kind of coined this term. And he says so in the opening tractate of the Corpus Hermeticum, in which he presents Hermes Trismegistus as the fountainhead of all Prisca Theologia. He traces this genealogy of pagan sages from Hermes to Orpheus, Pythagoras, and Plato. He calls them 6 theologians in wonderful order. Let me pull up Ficino now that we're on Ficino here. Sorry. I'm all over the place here. Okay. So here's do I have okay, that's Pico. I don't have an image of Ficino, but you can look it up, I guess. I'll just keep young Pico up here. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. So yeah, I mean, this is where you see this, like, this was all like kind of universalism, right? It was like they thought that the ancient Greek philosophy was like this source of all perennial wisdom. And so in reality, what the Hermetic corpus acted as was essentially a Trojan horse. This is what Hoffman argues, and I agree. It was basically a Trojan horse that introduced Plathan's revival of pagan Gnosticism in the West. And it legitimized the recovery of ancient pagan wisdom as being compatible with Christian revelation. And so it ended up basically creating this parallel chain of transmission that, was, like I said, it was monumental in shaping the Western world. But if you look at the Hermetic corpus, it shows this, ascent. Like, it shows this kind of aspect of like Gnostic ascent and everything. I'm not going to get too into the details of the Hermetic corpus, but one scholar actually, I'll pull this text up too. There's this one's pretty interesting. This one is, do I have it pulled up? No. Let me pull up, I think it's called the Great Hermes. The Wave Hermes, this one here. So again, he starts off his book. It's like, look, I'm showing you guys that everyone agrees that that in 1460, when this monk brought the Corpus Hermeticum to Florence, that was like the start of this transmission. So there's at least 3 scholars that I showed you just here that have traced it back to that. So he says here, this work shows, he's talking about the Corpus Hermeticum, without any doubt that the Hermetic believer was initiated into several grades before transcending the sphere of the 7 planets, so where it gets into cosmology, and the heaven of the fixed stars. Then he would behold the God beyond and experience himself. It is now completely certain that there existed before and after the beginning of the Christian era in Alexandria a secret society, akin to a Masonic lodge. So he's talking about this Hermetic society that was formed around the Platonic Academy. So he's ascribing it to a secret society that is similar to a Masonic lodge. And so Hoffman, at least here, is correct to say that there was some kind of conspiracy going on. In the Pomerandes, God, and that this is one of the primary texts in the Hermetic corpus, God brings forth the anthropos, man, who descends to create and falls into matter. That echoes the main theme in esoteric Judaism, and it's talking about Adam Kadmon, the primordial man. So you start to see, even though they don't have access to Kabbalah yet at this time, you start to see in the Hermetic corpus that there's a lot of these parallels with Kabbalah. And so when Kabbalah comes around, it's just like a natural bridge into the Hermetic corpus is like a natural bridge into Kabbalah. I think that's the important stuff here. After this, Hermetic writings lost their general fascination, but lived on in secret societies such as the Freemason and Rosicrucian. So yeah, I mean, this is an academic scholar saying that. This isn't speculative. And I believe this scholar was involved in the discovery of the Nag Hammadi in Egypt, which contained the... actually, this is where we're going to get into City of God. This is why I had the City of God book out, because interestingly, there were some church fathers who also believed that Hermes Trismegistus was contemporary of Moses, and that just shows that it was just assumed at the time. And so Augustine was one of them. St. Augustine wrote about Asclepius in City of God. And maybe I can just read some of that because it's pretty interesting. He's like talking about, sorry, my dog's barking again. You know what, guys? I'm gonna go see if I can calm her down. Give me one moment. I'm gonna be right back. Sorry, guys. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. So this is a pretty interesting passage, and Frances Yates goes into a huge. I think she dedicates a whole chapter to this, to the Asclepius, which was Asclepius was like another, another, like, I think Egyptian god that the Greeks were worshiping, that was like it might have been Greek, I don't remember, but it was associated with Hermes. I think it's, there's a whole section in the one of the manuscripts is I think it's just titled Asclepius, is what they call the Pomerandes. And so here is chapter 23 in City of God. This is book 8, chapter 23. St. Augustine is saying the writings of Hermes, the Egyptian, called Trismegistus, one of them Asclepius. The dialogue between Hermes and Asclepius was translated into Latin. And this is a really interesting passage. He's talking about, it is true that Apelles denied that they are gods. Nevertheless, on the ground that mediators between men and gods, the demons, are inseparable to mortals in their reputation to gods, he does not distinguish their cult from the worship of superior gods. The Egyptians, however, admit two categories of gods, some made by the supreme god, others by men. And so he says, but Hermes maintains these visible and tangible representations as it were, the bodies of gods. He claims that they are animated by spirits who have been invited to dwell within them and have the power either to harm or to favor those who render them reverence and divine honor. Thus, by some kind of art, invisible spirits are united with visible and material things, which become then animated bodies dedicated and devoted to the spirits that inhabit them. This, says Hermes, is what it means to make gods, and this great and amazing gift has been entrusted to men. And this is a great example of how even in the church fathers, you see that they were familiar with the pagan religion, like the pagan text, and like they were reading them to understand them. Of course, you see this with Saint Irenaeus as well, writing against the Gnostics. I mean, these guys, they were very in tune with like the other religious influences at the time. But I just thought this was interesting because he's talking about how they were animating statues, like they were taking, inhabiting demons into these statues, and the statues would come to life. And we see this all throughout the lives of the saints as well, where there's the pagans will force try to force our martyrs to, venerate or sacrifice to these statues that have inhabited demons, which I think ties into like why they would refuse to eat meat sacrificed to gods. Like that was just, to these actual demonic entities. Thank you guys let me catch up on some of the donos here. Thank you so much for donating while I'm just yapping here. I realize it's, I give you guys a lot of credit. I know that it's not the usual to, just watch YouTube streams for basically a impromptu lecture. I'm 5 minutes behind, but sadly Columbus was an Italian Jew. Sorry, fellow Italian bros. Yeah. Oh, I meant to say something about that. This is especially a tough pill to swallow for me, even though I'm not Catholic or anything. Like, it's not like I have any skin in the game, other than I'm like a full-blooded Italian, both sides of my family. And so these are my people that we're talking about. Like, these are the people responsible for starting this transmission of Western esotericism. It's like these were all Italians. Thank you for the $10, Alexander Kane. I appreciate the very generous support, brother. Lots of threads to pull on. Thanks for the research. Yeah, this is years of research, and there's still much to many threads. You're right about that. There's many threads to pull from here, but this is where it all started. So it does kind of like by 100 years after this, basically, it becomes more like a web. It becomes very hard to like understand how this transmission evolved. What else here? Yeah. So yes, exactly. They brought in heathen customs to get them to become Christian. Yeah. Well, they were syncretizing all these, esoteric traditions to, it was basically, it was perennialism. So they were just, this is what we're seeing is essentially like the Renaissance ecumenism. They believed that all this stuff pointed to the truth of Christianity. So this is another point that I want to make. I alluded to this, but this is why I read from St. Augustine. Also, St. Jerome was believed Hermes to be a contemporary of Moses and was much more sympathetic to the Hermetic corpus, which is interesting. Again, the saints aren't infallible, but and I think St. Clement as well wrote about the Hermetic corpus in Hermes. But it turned out they didn't find out until 1614, so over 100 years after. A Swiss Calvinist from Geneva named Isaac Casaubon. There's a whole chapter dedicated to him as well in Yeats' Giordano Bruno in the Hermetic tradition. And so Casaubon proves that the Hermetic corpus was not as old as it pretended to be. but should be dated after the beginning of the Christian era. So it was a post-Christian pseudepigrapha. That's what you need to understand about the Hermetic corpus. It was not ancient. It certainly did not date back to Moses. It was a post-Christian pseudepigrapha. Like most of these hugely influential esoteric texts, they were written pseudepigraphically and were not as ancient as they were believed to be by their original propagators. So that was pretty much a death blow to Hermeticism when that happened. And I think Yates describes like how he went about that. He used this whole like philological methodology to, he's discovering that there was all this language in there that wouldn't have been known at the time. So I believe that's how he did it. And similar also to the Kabbalah as well. Kabbalah was perceived, at least the Zohar was perceived to be much more ancient than it really is. It was a 13th century pseudepigraphal text. And so, maybe this is what leads us to Kabbalah here. Let me see. So the chain was broken there, but that wasn't until 100 years later, at least. So here's kind of the logical progression to how the Hermetic corpus led to Kabbalah. And then we're going to get into the juicy stuff. So Ficino himself believed that the ancient theologians were indebted to the Hebrew scriptures. And so if Hermes Trismegistus was believed to be a contemporary of Moses, then Kabbalah, which, by the way, the word Kabbalah means received tradition, or that which is received. They believe that, because the Kabbalah was older than Hermes, then it must have contained the most pristine theology ever known to man. So it's like it was perceived as the ultimate Prisca Theologia. And additionally, all these Renaissance humanists were, this was their main effort, was to search for all this ancient wisdom, and Kabbalah offered something unique that the Hermetic corpus didn't, which is that it came with access to the living tradition of rabbis. So you could get direct access to consult the living rabbis who had direct access to this chain of transmission. At least that's what they believed. And so there you have this like unholy alliance of Jewish mysticism, pagan Gnosticism being revived, and they're syncretizing it with Christian theology because they believe that all this, it's revealing all this perennial wisdom about Christ and their understanding of anthropology, and, Christ as the Adam Kadmon is what they believed. And, by the way, people always ask like if there's Orthodox writings against this stuff. And yes, I just point to St. Irenaeus. You can just read Against Heresies. I think the first two books are directly condemning Valentinian Gnosticism, which is all this stuff is Valentinian Gnosticism. It's essentially just repackaged with like different cultural language. Like they just it's pagan Gnosticism with a Jewish or Hermetic skin suit, basically. And even Moshe Adel, who is the foremost scholar of Kabbalah that is alive today, he says that without the open attitude of the open attitude that influenced acceptance of the I'm going to start over. I'm retarded right now. Moshe Adel observed that without the open attitude that influenced acceptance of the relevance of the pagan corpus, it seems unlikely that the Hebrew mystical writings would have been embraced so warmly in this circle. So he's attributing the discovery of the Hermetic corpus and the influence that it had on the humanists in the Reformation period. He's attributing that directly to the influence of Kabbalah. Like, it just made this logical progression into Kabbalah. I'm going to switch over here because I don't really have much to show right now. And maybe shortly we're going to get into Pico. The appeal to tradition fallacy. Yeah, this is the I feel like it's almost yeah, there's got to be some actual fallacy. I'm not as well versed on logical fallacies as I should be, but there's got to be some kind of thing where it's like this whole thing was this whole thing was justified on this basic appeal to the old, like, if it's the oldest, it means it's more true. The oldest wisdom, it must be the most true because it's the oldest. And so these guys all got one-shotted by their own presupposition that if it was the oldest, it must have been the most true, because what happened was all these manuscripts that they were in a frenzy to translate and to incorporate into their perennial philosophy turned out to not be ancient at all. So that ended up, they ended up shooting themselves in the foot with that. Are my messages coming through? Yes. I see them. I see it. I'm sorry. I'm not the most engaged with the chat tonight. My apologies, guys. The deep dives are not as engaging because I'm looking at text and everything. You know how it is. Is it Kabbalah, the Doctrines, Development, and Literature by... are you asking about one of the books I showed? Let me see here. No, I don't think I have that one. But this one's pretty good too. I'll show you a couple here. So this is the Christian Kabbalah, Jewish Mystical Books and Their Christian Interpreters by Joseph Dan. This is another Jewish scholar. A lot of these, like a lot of the academic works on this are from Jewish scholars because, you know, there's not a whole lot of Christian scholars that are like specializing in the study of Kabbalah and its history, you know. So yeah, you can see some of the contents here. This is another academic, it's a graduate thesis, but this one had a lot of great references. Crazy title. And then there's another one by Moshe Adel. It's called The Kabbalah in Italy. That's a huge book. But yeah, I mean, there's so much, like, for me to even attempt to cover this in a single stream is actually insane. But yeah, so I guess we can get into Kabbalah. So, because that's kind of, we're in the timeline now, right? Like I would say the moment of dominance in the Hermetic tradition during the Renaissance was pretty short-lived because it pretty quickly led to Kabbalah. I just laid out the logic there of how that occurred. And so I'm not going to get into details about, I don't know. I think it's going to get a little off track if I get into details about this, but basically, you have the Sefer HaZohar, which is the Zohar, the Book of Radiance, it's called. It enters the Renaissance and gains way more interest than the Hermetic corpus because, well, first, the Hebrew tradition is more closely linked to the ancient Christian tradition, and then also they believed that Kabbalah revealed all these Christian mysteries like the Trinity, especially. We can get into a little bit of how, if you guys are interested. I don't want to like lose too many people with getting too esoteric. I mean, I guess you guys are here for it. Let me know in the chat, I guess, like hit ones in the chat if you like want to get into the details to understand like why these guys were so interested in Kabbalah as supposed Christian humanists. But so, another side note is that, yeah, like I said, the Zohar itself, Gershom Scholem actually was the one that discovered that through his scholarship, and very reluctantly had to basically admit that it was not written by the rabbi who they thought it was, which was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He was a 2nd century Talmudic sage. That was who the Zohar was first attributed to. But it was instead deemed as a 13th century pseudepigrapha work. It was written by Moses de Leon, who was a Castilian Kabbalist, so Spanish Kabbalist. And he was, instead of being contemporary to Moses or even, someone in the 1st century, he was actually contemporary to Thomas Aquinas and Dante. So not ancient at all. It was a middle-age pseudepigrapha. And so this brings us to Pico della Mirandola. Again, I've talked about this guy a lot. So if you're familiar with my work and you've been, at some of my streams where I just yap about this stuff, you've definitely heard this name come up. I'm having to manually change this stuff here, but here's Pico della Mirandola. He was very young, prodigy. He was a nobleman. I think 19 to 23 was when he stumbled upon the Zohar. He was also a polyglot. He was fluent in several languages. Brilliant guy. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. He was obviously very brilliant young man, very ambitious, also very prideful, as we'll see. But here's the face of the man who basically started this. It could have just ended there with Ficino, and it likely would have. I think I've even read scholars that have said this, that this is how monumental Pico's influence was, is that it would have, like, the Hermetic trend would have likely not have spread as widely if it not had been for Pico, who developed. You're looking at the godfather of Christian Kabbalah. This is who developed the syncretic system of Kabbalah and Christianity, Christian theology. Well, I want to actually be more specific and say, humanist Catholic theology. And he was also seen as a proto-Protestant because of the way in which he challenged the papacy, the ongoing debates and disputes that he had between the various popes. I believe Pope Alexander, and then Pope Pope? I don't know if he was alive during Pope Leo. I don't remember. Is it orthodox to make a dartboard of his face? So if you want my take on these guys, like, Hoffman is very harsh on these guys. He's very harsh on them, and he's justified in being harsh on them. He calls Pico a like a demonically deceived kind of like evil person almost, in the way that he describes him. Obviously he was deceived. He's right about that. He was very much like giga prelest, like he was super basically a perennialist. He was a Gnostic, like pseudo-Gnostic, I would say, because he was all kind of cloaking it within Christian theology. But well, thank you for another $10 from our top guy. I ask dumb questions. The Jesuit Catholic school in Chicago that my grandfather grew up in taught kids Castilian Spanish. When I asked her what's the difference, she just said it's Spanish with a lisp, because the king had a lisp. Interesting. Yeah. So this is Pico. So Pico, like I said, the godfather of Christian Kabbalah. He began to systematize it, And I didn't see if there's ones in the chat. Let's see. Okay, there's a good amount of ones. All right, so you guys are interested in the... we'll get into it a little bit here, but basically, Pico had contact with Ficino, so he leaves for Florence, or I'm sorry, he leaves. He's in Florence and leaves for. I'm getting ahead of myself here. He arrives in Florence in 1484. And when he arrives in Florence, he gains the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici. This is the successor of Cosimo. And he comes under the tutorship of Ficino. And there's a scholar, James Bono, who describes the partnership. So this is similar to like the kind of wording that Hoffman uses, which I do agree with. He says, Pico's vision of the dignity of man, of man's transformative power as magus, owes a profound debt to his fellow Florentine Marsilio Ficino's recuperation of the ancient Hermetica and of the reputation of its alleged author, Hermes Trismegistus. So there he's saying that Pico's whole vision owes a profound debt to Ficino and the Hermetica. And so he says, together, Ficino and the younger Pico resurrected earlier traditions, some of them highly unorthodox, to give birth to the vigorous progeny Renaissance magic. So you're also looking at, I mean, Ficino was a magician as well. So like, I wouldn't say Pico was like the first Renaissance humanist like magician, but and interestingly, Ficino was a priest as well. So he was a Catholic priest who was doing all this Hermetic magic. He was a pretty eccentric guy. If you just read about the life of Ficino, like when he started getting into all this magic and stuff, he was like doing these wild rituals. But it says, so he basically, Pico was fusing together Latin scholasticism with Greek philosophy, Hermetic magic, and Jewish Kabbalah, which developed into what Francis Yates calls the Great Charter of Renaissance Magic that was absolutely fundamental to the whole of the Renaissance. And so this is with the introduction of Pico's 900 theses, not 90, 900 theses. So this was what established him as the godfather of Kabbalah, of Christian Kabbalah, was that he wrote these 900 theses. This was again another kind of like a forerunner instance of the Reformation, right? With the Reformation, it sparks with the whole legend of Luther nailing the 95 Theses to the doors of Wittenberg. Well, in the Renaissance version of that, with the introduction of Christian Kabbalah, you have Pico della Mirandola publishing his 900 Thesis, which was a single public disputation that he believed would synthesize the entire wisdom of mankind into this unified perennial philosophy. And this is what Francis Yates calls the charter of the whole Renaissance. It becomes basically the manifesto of the Renaissance. And of the 900 theses, 119 of them were explicitly Kabbalistic, and especially the final 72 conclusions, which Pico himself listed as his own Kabbalistic opinions. And there was like he was very careful. Again, he was brilliant because he was very careful to say that his more, his blatantly Kabbalistic claims were his opinions, like to kind of, tiptoe around any kind of papal consequences. But we'll see what happens with that. So it is the count of the angels. The 72, by the way. So the 72 conclusions, his Kabbalistic conclusions, was not a random number. He was referring to the count of the angels in the Kabbalistic Shem HaMeshaparish. I know I'm saying that wrong. Who cares? I'm not trying to cast some kind of Hebrew spell. And this was the referencing the 72 letter explicit name of God, so the Tetragrammaton. And so he also offered to defend all 900 theses in a public debate, and even offered opponents from across the Christian world to pay for their travel to do so. So he was you can see how eager he was to defend these conclusions that he came to, as he offered to debate literally anybody in the Christian world. And so he also believed, by the way, that his disputations were this like theurgic event that would accelerate the eschaton and the second coming. And in a way, he did succeed in doing this, because he effectively created the entire apocalyptic vein of esoteric Protestantism that increasingly sought to like catechalize the second coming through all these revolutionary activities that they got into with millenarian movements and whatnot. And so you see that even the renowned Protestant theologian Philip Schaff suggested that Pico's 13 suspect propositions were what he says, like those on the Eucharist and the adoration of images, establish him as a proto-Protestant hero by founding a favorable Protestant audience, including the Swiss reformer Ulrich Zwingli. I've talked about this before in previous streams, how Zwingli was influenced by Pico. I can pull up, this is in the Newman text, Louis Newman. I can pull up some excerpts from that. I believe I might have shown this before. So it says here, was Zwingli acquainted with the Kabbalah? There are indications that he was familiar with certain Jewish legends or Haggadah. In his allegory and his search for Christian types and biblical personages and his repeated discovery of mysteries in the Old Testament text, there's evidence of a desire on the part of Zwingli to apply esoteric principles in his exegesis of the Bible. So, because remember, with Pico's implementation of Christian Kabbalah, it was mostly exegetical. Like, it was all applying Kabbalistic hermeneutics to the biblical text. And so this hermeneutical method was very popular, and basically this is what he's saying, is that it trickled into the Reformation, especially with Zwingli. And it says here, this is where we're going to get into a little the how it relates to how did they actually syncretize it. But in his explanation of the ineffable name, the reformer appears to have borrowed from the mystical works of both Pico Mirandola and Johann Reuchlin. It is known that Zwingli made use of Reuchlin's, this was his Hebrew rudimenta. So his Hebrew, what do you call it? Like rubrics, this was like what they used, what the Protestants used to do their translation work of the Hebrew Old Testament. And it also followed with interest the progress of his controversy with Dominican monks. Maybe we'll get into that. I don't know. That might be, I might not get to that. I spoke about that in the last stream, the Battle of the Books. That's a little bit ahead here, but, he says here, from Pico di Mirandola, it is certain that Zwingli borrowed considerably. The reformer, while a teacher in Basel, approved of several of the theses, which, however, is unknown. That Pico di Mirandola, he's calling him Pico di Mirandola, had proposed to maintain against all corners in the winter of 1486. And then he's talking about Pope Innocent the Eighth here, who prohibited the discussion. So he's telling you exactly what happened here was that Pico never got to defend his theses because Pope Innocent the Eighth prohibited the debate from occurring and condemned the 900 theses. And he says here, this is a good text to show this. If you guys are interested in like what Pico did, he's showing you here through doctrines that Zwingli adopted from Pico, from his 900 Theses. And he lists them here. Is this where he lists them? I have the physical book of this, so I'm not as familiar with the PDF. Oh yeah, right here. Okay. And so he says, among these are three in which have special interest for us in light of Zwingli's doctrines. That neither the cross of Christ nor any image ought to be adored in the way of worship. Huh. Interesting. So what he's alluding to here is that Zwingli, don't forget, was he was the most iconoclastic of all the reformers by far. And there's a famous quote from Zwingli himself who says that Zwingli, the Jews don't carry images with them, and so neither do the Zwinglians. And so he's attributing that iconoclasm directly here to Pico. This is why, again, Philip Schaff, the famous Protestant church historian, even calls Pico a Protestant, champion of proto-Protestant, revolution, essentially. He says, so here, another one of Pico's doctrines, that God cannot assume the nature of any kind whatsoever, but only a rational nature. So these, again, were doctrines that Zwingli co-opted. That no science affords a better assurance of the divinity of Christ than the magical or Kabbalistic science. That is I would say, the most famous of all of Pico's theses, was that one right there. That became a very famous passage from his thesis, that no science affords a better assurance of the divinity of Christ than magical or Kabbalistic science. That's how demonically, influenced that this young guy was. Yes, thank you for the context there, Keith. In case you don't know, Zwingli was one of the three primary magisterial reformers. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I stumbled down this rabbit hole. I just started to read footnotes and see who they were citing, and you see the same names reoccur, and you just start reading those books. Yeah, that's how it happens. So getting back to Pico, if you guys want to get into some of the nitty gritty, thank you for everyone who's tuned in. I'm not even looking at how many viewers we have here. 71 people watching. Amazing. There's 71 people watching this Yap stream. So thank you guys for all tuning in. I hope this is somewhat enjoyable. I think that's all the photos I have, actually. So, but we're not done with Pico, so I'll leave him up. So yeah, you see that apocalyptic, speculation and urgency. Even with the publishing of the 900 Thesis, there's this, he has this notion that he's going to spark the acceleration of the eschaton. And like I said, in many ways he did, because not in a real sense where he could, any human can actually do that, but in the sense that it created that effort that went on for 500 years after, right? You saw this happen all through these Protestant millenarian movements, and cult and whatnot. So you see that there's these varying degrees of Jewish influence that start to appear in, can trace back in nearly every European intellectual movement. There's a Jewish influence. And so this, of course, is no exception when we're talking about Kabbalah, right? How did these guys even discover or translate Kabbalah? Because it was up until this point, it was in Hebrew. I believe it was Reuchlin who first started translating Kabbalah into Latin. And so Pico was not, he was not a Hebraist. He was not, although he was a polyglot, he didn't know Hebrew. And so he needed a tutor. So enter Flavius Mithridates. Mithridates was, Pico's Hebrew tutor who translated all these Kabbalistic texts for him. And we found that in, let me see if I can pull this up. Now, not that we're going to read too much from it, but this was a fascinating study. I'm not able to like switch scenes as easily tonight. Is it this one? No, it's a different one. It was Pico's encounter. It's called Pico's Encounter with Jewish Mysticism. If I can find that. Here, Wizerpsky. And so what you're looking at here is this is like the study that found what I'm about to show here. I've mentioned this before. So this is basically what he found. Again, a Jewish scholar who's known for this study found that Mithridates was purposely, this is where it gets into the conspiracy, right? Where it's like, perhaps there actually was a conspiracy going on here, because this Mithridates character was purposely manipulating these translations for Pico. So think about this, right? You have this influence of Christian Kabbalah that, on the one hand, you have the Zohar itself is kind of like debunked in terms of how ancient it is. So it's not so ancient at all. It's a medieval forgery. I don't want to say forgery, but it's a pseudepigrapha, right? So it was like kind of written with the perception that it was very ancient, and it wasn't. And then on the other hand, you have the quote godfather of Christian Kabbalah, who's receiving these translations from a rabbi who is purposely distorting the translations to have all these Christological, references to it. And so Pico's like, wow, look at that. It's amazing. It's confirming what I thought, that the Kabbalah points to Christ. It points to the divinity of Christ. It reveals all this perennial wisdom, and that justified his whole syncretic worldview. But in reality, what happened was he just had a deceptive rabbi who was, probably profiting off of him because he was getting paid very handsomely. And, we know that he had done this before because I'm going to see if I can pull up where he talks about this in the Hoffman text. Basically, this guy Mithridates delivered a Kabbalistic lecture to the Pope himself, where he did the same thing. He tried to draw out all these Christological allegories from Kabbalah that weren't there, and he fooled everyone because no one knew Hebrew. And thus begins that whole transmission of like dependency on Jewish rabbis to understand this, this wisdom that they thought revealed the divinity of Christ in it. Here's Hoffman. Oh, look at this one. I just pulled up a random page. Like, this is how interesting this book is. Let me see if I can find his stuff on Mithridates. Again, this takes a while to search. Mithridates. Yeah. Okay. So here, false beliefs like this are founded upon ignorance. It was Cardinal Lorenzo Cibo, the staunchly conservative future Pope Innocent VIII, who was the earliest patron of Flavius Mithridates. Okay, so there you go. Who is funding this subversive rabbi to teach Kabbalah in among all these higher echelon intellectuals at the time? Well, it was the Pope. he says the Kabbalistic Judaic, who thanks to future Pope Innocent became preacher to the papal household of Sixtus the Fourth, Pico's handler, initiator, and a homosexual suitor for Pico's affections, as well as a professor at a papally chartered college. Now, the claim that there was that Pico had some homosexual relationship is not the consensus, but keep in mind Hoffman is a revisionist historian, so there may be truth to that. By bringing Mithridates to Rome and sponsoring his rise inside the church, Innocent the Eighth, while a cardinal, made possible the Kabbalism of Pico. In remarkably short order, a reprint of the first edition appeared in the next year in Ingolstadt, the home to the University of Ingolstadt, where Reuchlin and much later Adam Weishaupt, you guys know Adam Weishaupt, right? Founder of the Illuminati, would be members of its faculty. Its remarkable immediate republication in what will become the late 18th century, a capital of the Bavarian Illuminati, is seldom mentioned. Yeah, interesting. Behind the curtain of received opinion and consensus reality, Pico's magnum opus was circulating without hindrance, issued by a German Catholic printing press. So his opus, he's talking about the 900 Theses, I think in particular on the oration of the dignity of man, which was the introduction to the 900 Theses, and which became also the, like, essentially what Yeats called the manifesto of the Renaissance. So think about that. You have this Renaissance historian, multiple Renaissance historians, attributing the introduction to these Kabbalistic theses as the manifesto of the entire Renaissance. So it cannot be understated the influence that Kabbalah had on the Renaissance. It was reprinted without interdiction. I'm sorry. It was reprinted without interdiction in Catholic France. So he's just telling you that basically there was very little pushback for the Catholic Church to print and disseminate these heretical Kabbalistic theses throughout Europe. Whole sections of the 900 Theses contain propositions and undermining or contradiction St. Thomas Aquinas, not saint, but yeah, he's Catholic. Yet modern Catholic writers frequently misrepresent Pico as a Thomist, only because the details of what constitutes the Kabbalah are largely unknown or obscured. Can Pico, for whom the doctrines of the Kabbalah are at the heart of his philosophical nova, be presented by Catholic scholars as supposedly in agreement with Thomas Aquinas? So they what he's kind of alluding to here is that Catholic theologians and historians who cover this try to kind of like ascribe Pico to being some kind of Thomist or something. And maybe he was, like, I haven't gone that deep into this. Like, I wouldn't take all of what Hoffman is saying here as factual. Not that he's like, I'm not trying to say he's lying either or anything like that, but these are the kind of claims that people challenge. Like, I'm just saying, if you were to use this in, like, with Catholics, who know this history, they might call some of this out. Yeah, so this is a really interesting section about Mithridates. Sorry, let me catch up on chat here, guys. There's a good intro book to Zwingli and the main reformers in Father Josiah Trem's book, Rock and Sand. Yeah. He certainly doesn't get into this, but it's mostly not needed for a book like that. The consequences of Giga Prelest. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, this is what, like, Hoffman is arguing, that this thread that we can trace directly back to Ficino and Pico is responsible for, like, what you see now with, the Vatican II and Nostra Aetate. And don't forget, we just saw the Pope Leo a few months ago, like this year, made that speech. I forget what he was like at some kind of ecumenical conference, and he made a speech where he said Tikkun Olam. He said, our Jewish brothers and sisters call this Tikkun Olam, world repair, right? That's straight from Kabbalah. So I think he's implying here that Mithridates and Pico had some kind of homo relationship. Seems he's saying, there's sources for that. He does source everything. He has a lot of sources to back his claims. So anyway, let me see if there's anything else with Pico. Oh yeah. Okay. So Pico's 72 Kabbalistic conclusions, which include his famous declaration that we just covered, that Zwingli adopted, that no science provides more certainty of Christ's divinity than magic and Kabbalah. This was a direct result of Mithridates' forgeries. And they were designed to support that exact notion. So this is the level of manipulation going on here, is that Pico is this very smart, obviously very brilliant guy, but also very foolish, because he allowed this subversive Jew to basically psyop him into thinking that Kabbalah pointed to this, that there was no other science that proved Christ's divinity more certainly than magic and Kabbalah. That was a direct result of Mithridates' textual manipulations. And the first of Pico's own opinions that were in his Kabbalistic conclusions included this conceptual division of Kabbalah into a speculative, which is also known as a prophetic, and practical, which is known to be magic. That was taken word for word from Mithridates' Latin translation of a treatise by Abraham Abulafia, who was a 13th century Kabbalist, very, very renowned Kabbalist in the 13th century. And so here's where we get into a little bit of like how he syncretized Kabbalah. He developed a bipartite system which emphasized theurgic techniques of letter combination, which is this is a Kabbalistic hermeneutic method called Surif. And he also used a permutation of divine names as paths to prophetic experience, which he got from Raymond Lull's Ars Combinati, which is the science of the revolution of the alphabet. So this is, gets into Raymond Lull, which is way further back. So I don't want to go too far back, but Pico was very influenced by this Raymond Lull, who he considered a Kabbalist in his time. And so this was the most foundational concept of Christian Kabbalah, which was that the Hebrew letters are understood as these building blocks of creation. And this is what you see in the opening of the Sefer Yitzra, which is the book of creation in Kabbalah, which is, it's like a mystical commentary on Genesis, which the Zohar also is. And in the opening line of the Sefer Yitzra, it says, with 32 paths of hidden wisdom, God, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the living God, decreed and created the world. Which, see, it's like, what's wrong with that? Well, what's with the 32 paths? What does that mean? What does 32 paths of hidden wisdom of God mean? Well, these 32 paths correspond with the 32 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And this is what comprises the 10 Sephirot. So you guys, I'm going to pull up a visual, so I'm sure you guys have seen this. This is the Kabbalistic Sephirot. Sorry. Yeah. This is the Sephirot here. I'm sure you've all seen this. I don't know if it's a good image of this, but here. Oh, gosh. Yeah, we'll pull up this one. So this is the Sephirah, right? 32 paths, 10 spheres, right? And so, oh, thank you, sir. Oh, Seraphim Rosario, what's up, brother? Thank you so much for the donation. I appreciate that. And so this was, it cannot be understated how influential this is in this whole system, right? So like you guys already see now how this was mostly this hermeneutical method that presupposed that there was these like levels of ascent and through the cosmos that corresponded with the Hebrew letters themselves, right? And this is the most foundational concept within Kabbalah and Christian Kabbalah. And so these are 32 paths that correspond with the Hebrew alphabet. This is also described in the Zohar. It goes into great depth on this full theosophic system in the 13th century Zohar. The letters are divided into 3 mother letters that represent the elements. You have 12 simple letters that govern the senses. You can see the letters in here. The senses and the passions. And the double letters that correspond with the fundamental forces of existence. And you can see also like there's depictions of the Sephirah. Maybe this is, let's pull up Jugal for this. I don't like those image results because there's better. Yeah, this is a pretty schizo diagram. I believe actually the one we're looking at here, if I'm not mistaken, is from what is this one? This one I think is from Kunrath's Kabbalah, the Protestant. He was a Protestant that translated Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah Denundata it's called. I believe this is a visual from that. Anyway, you can see here is this is a better image here that shows the letters that we're talking about here. Gosh, nothing lets you click it anymore. This is crazy. I hate the internet. So you have, Keter. I'm not going to name all of them, but these also correspond with like the human anatomy. And you can see here that they ascribe them to like the Keter at the top is the crown. You have wisdom, understanding, mercy, justice, beauty, glory. The Yesod is the foundation, which is also corresponds with the male's phallic area. And there's the Zohar has a ton of these really weird sexual allegories and stuff that involve the penis. And so they consider that the foundation. And then of course you have the Shekinah, which is the feminine half of God in Kabbalah. And that is when the Yesod and the Malkut combine. So you have literally a divine intercourse that combines and makes the Shekinah, comprises the Shekinah. And this actually is what, when you see Jews do their ritual prayers, this is a Kabbalistic ritual. When you see them do the thrusting motion, that's quite literally they're air humping the Shekinah. They actually even say that. I found a bunch of quotes of rabbis even admitting to that's what's going on. They believe they're having divine intercourse with the Shekinah. And so you'll see that very commonly at the Wailing Wall, because they believe that the Shekinah's presence is the strongest at the Wailing Wall, because that's what they believe was the temple where the Shekinah was manifest in the behind the altar. And so there was a lot of Trinitarian synthesis in here as well. Pico drew all these structural elements from Abraham Abulafia's works and applied Mithridates, manipulated, Christianized text translations. And this appears the most clearly in his final conclusions. This is a direct quote from Pico's conclusions. He says, whoever is profound in the science of Kabbalah can understand that the 3 4-letter names of God, which exist in the secrets of the Kabbalists, through miraculous appropriation, should be attributed to the 3 persons of the Trinity like this, so that the name Yahweh is that of the Father, the name Yahweh of the Son, the name Adonai of the Holy Spirit. And so, of course, we're talking about the Tetragrammaton here. This is a huge, this is like essential to Christian Kabbalah. It all involves the Tetragrammaton and applying this Kabbalistic hermeneutic to the Tetragrammaton itself. So the YHWH in the Hebrew, they apply that and they think that it corresponds with, with like revealing the divinity of Christ and the Trinity. This is formulated into a more systematic expression through Reuchlin's work. So Reuchlin then systematizes Christian Kabbalah. I'm getting a little ahead there, but things start to really like kind of parallel there. And so here you see another quote from Pico. He says, okay, this is where he gets into Adam Kadmon. So I'll show you how this corresponds with Adam Kadmon. I know that I've seen images of this. Yeah. So there's multiple images of this. This is Adam Kadmon, in Kabbalah, the primordial man. And this is so look, you can see it corresponding with the anatomy here. There's Yesod right there in the, nether regions. And wearing the crown, right? And so they believe, this represents Christ. The Christian Kabbalists believe that this is the representative of Christ. You can see here, even they try to depict him as Christ, Adam Kadmon. And really, it's really when you read the Jewish description of Adam Kadmon, it's the Antichrist. So this is how perverse this stuff is that what they're actually describing is the Antichrist, and they all get psyoped into thinking, because there's all this Jewish manipulation and correspondence with rabbis that are translating the Hebrew for them. At least in the case of Mithridates. They're getting fooled into thinking that this is representing Christ, and it's actually in the Hebrew text when you read it, the Hebrew interpretation from the Jewish mystical perspective, it sounds a whole lot like the Antichrist. Because they believe that this is the Adam Kadmon represents the merging of opposing forces too. So this is what holds the universe in balance. It manifests in the primordial man, Adam Kadmon. And it gets into all this crazy stuff. I wrote a whole article on this. I'll show you guys real quick. Hello over to my Substack viewers. I forgot to check in on you guys. Hope I didn't miss any chats there. It doesn't look like it. Not hugely engaging on Substack, but that's okay. They're new to streaming there. This article here, Mystical Resistance, How the Zohar Hijacked Christianity to Destroy It. Now, many of you know of these claims that you'll see these videos of rabbis talking about the destruction of Edom and the destruction of Christianity. That's all from the Zohar. People think that's from the Talmud. It's actually directly from the Zohar. And that's what I'm writing about here. So I actually talk about Pico here and Mithridates, because you have two levels of, well, actually there's 3 levels of deception going on here. So first is you have first on the layer of the translation work as it's being introduced into the Renaissance world, where you have it's guarded esoterica at the time, and Christians were not able to interpret or read it because it was in Hebrew and it was very mystical, right? So you needed to consult rabbis for it. And so you have this layer of deception going on with the translations themselves being manipulated to prove what the Christian Kabbalists thought they were syncretizing. And then on another layer of deception, you have the dating of the Zohar, which is, again, 13th century, it's not ancient. And then on a deeper level, you have the authorship of the Zohar, which was written in Castile, Spain. And under the time of, so this is again where it ties into the apocalyptic part. It was written under a time of persecution of the Jews by the Spanish inquisitors. And so they had a lot of animosity towards Christianity at the time. And they wrote this into it was written into the pages of the Zohar. And this is where like the whole thing about, let me see, Edom, Esau, and the kingdom of idolatry. So yeah, it says throughout the pages of the Zohar, Edom, Esau, and the other side, and the kingdom of idolatry are all encoded to represent Christendom, a rabbinic tradition that predates the Zohar by centuries. And so this is another great scholar to read, Wolfson. Elliot Wolfson is his name. He notes that Esau equals... This is one of these Jewish scholars that just like reveals so much. It's like this guy is just telling you straight up what these codes mean. And so he says right here, Esau equals Edom as a symbol for the demonic power. It appears throughout the Zohar, and it's quite possible that the Zoharic interpretation of Genesis 36:31 is a symbolic depiction of the historical relationship of the church and the synagogue, i.e. Christianity, which is symbolically Edom, or the demonic power, reigns before Judaism. And so that's where this comes from. But this other Jewish academic, Leibs, speculates further that Edom, as a well-known title for Christianity, connects some of the Zohar's striking imagery about spiritual impotence and celibacy, possibly referring to the monastic ideal and symbolically the celibate popes as successors in the line of defective spiritual rulers. So there you go. It's straight from the Zohar. It's like you don't even have to get into debates over this stuff. It's right there. Now, this also ties in, like, I'm really trying to resist going down this rabbit hole because I think you guys will find it super interesting. But a whole other aspect to this is the Sitra Ahra, which is the inverse Sifrot. So it's the inversion of the tree of life. And this is also known as the Kapalth realm. I don't think I'm saying that right, but it's like the Kapotic realm or something like that. Basically the demonic realm. So they have this whole explanation of the demonic realm, which is, it mirrors the Sifrot. And this gets into how the entirety of Kabbalah is all dialectic. So they believe that in Kabbalah, and Pico actually even alludes to this in his syncretism. So he tries to kind of give this a Christian spin. The Kabbalists believe that to hold reality in dialectical tension, to balance out the forces of good and evil, a proper sacrifice and propitiation must be made to the demonic realm. And so in the Zohar, I'm giving you guys what's behind the paywall here, because I did paywall this article, but it says here, I quoted directly from the Zohar. The Zohar inverts the prefigured Christ by viewing Job as a fool who failed to offer sacrifice to the demonic forces of the other side. So it's explaining, and now keep in mind, the Holy Fathers describe Job as a prototype of Christ, and his suffering is a symbolic of Christ's suffering on the cross. So keep that in mind. And so here's what the demonic Zohar says about Job, that Job never gave any portion to the other side, which is the Sitra Achra, As it is written, he offered up burnt offerings according to the number of them all. According to them all, the burnt offerings rises upwards. He did not give any portion to the other side, for if he had given him a portion, he could not have overcome him afterwards. They're talking about Satan. Come and see. Just as he separated and did not contain the good and evil together, so in the exact manner he was judged. God gave him good then evil, and then he returned him the good. Thus it is fitting for a person to know that to know good and that to know evil, and then return to the good. That is the secret of the faith. So they're saying the secret of the faith, according to the Zohar, is that you actually have to give to God what is to God and give to the devil what he is due. To keep the dialectical tension of opposing forces of good and evil in a harmonizing balance, right? And so this is why, like, and you can read this in Jewish Religion, Jewish History by Israel Shahak. He talks about how in the Kabbalistic prayers, they are actually offering propitiation to Satan, and they do this to ward him off so that he'll go bother the Gentiles on the Sabbath and not the Jewish people. So they're actually, sacrificing to the demonic. So that's like literally where that comes from, that they worship Satan. It's like in the Zohar. It's not like people saying these like anti-Semitic accusations. It's like that's in their text. And this goes into like Zohar. So that you might be like, why do I need to know this? Because this is the system that Pico and Reuchlin appropriated in their syncretic, Renaissance Christian Kabbalah. I'm showing you how demonic this infiltration of occultism in the Catholic Church was. And and keep in mind the popes, Pope Alexander and Pope, what was his name? I'm blanking on his name. But you had at least two popes that helped to disseminate this system throughout Europe. And we'll get into, it wasn't 100% support. There was some papal pushback to this that we'll get into shortly here. But this goes into Zoharic cosmology that is, to some degree worth understanding if you're interested in this. But it's describing so in the Zohar and Kabbalah, God, their version of God is described as the Ein Sof, who is the infinite nothingness. And God, and they believe that their God is the creator of evil. So God himself created the realm of evil, which is known as the other side that they ascribe to to Christendom. And this emerged from the primordial unformed matter that it's called tohu, which is chaos in Kabbalah. And this is when these residual shells, or they call them husks or shells, of the shattered vessels that formed during creation. So these vessels are shattered, it forms this chaos, and from that chaos, the unformed matter creates the evil other side, or the mirror realm of the Sephiroth. So evil and matter are therefore interconnected, and this is what gets into Gnostic cosmology. This is essentially Gnostic cosmology. It's just describing Gnosticism in a Jewish skin suit. And by the way, you can look to Gershom Scholem for that admission. Gershom Scholem, throughout his work, is drawing all these parallels between ancient Valentinian Gnosticism, the same strain of Gnosticism that Saint Irenaeus condemned and against heresies. That's what Scholem is comparing Kabbalah to. Like when he's talking about the cosmology, he draws all these allusions to Gnosticism. And that's, by the way, the foremost scholar of he's literally known as the godfather of the modern study of Kabbalah. He's saying right there throughout his work that it's Gnostic. So that's why you have to understand this is all just Gnosticism, right? Same with Hermeticism. And that's why they just adopted it so easily. And it was almost like their syncretic system was primed for Kabbalah. And this is what they thought made sense out of everything. And so evil, and according to this framework, it says evil was ontologically bound within the Kabbalistic Godhead itself. In order to emanate reality, these forces of evil had to be expelled from the divine. In other words, the Zohar teaches that evil is not a privation of good, as the church fathers taught, but rather it is rooted in the creative act of God, the Ein Sof. So evil emerges from God himself. It's wild. This stuff is so wild. Okay, so where are we here? Let me just get to my timeline. Yeah, and so, yeah, I went over the Gnostic part. It also, I think this also inverts the, or collapses rather, the creator-creature distinction. And again, you can just look at Saint Irenaeus on Against Heresies. Like, read that if you want the full kind of condemnation of what we're looking at here. Even though he's not writing against Kabbalah, he's writing against Valentinian Gnosticism, which is like Kabbalah is just a reappropriation of that. It's Jewish Gnosticism. So it's worth noting that the earliest stratum of Kabbalistic literature, which is the Sefer HaBahir, which is the Book of Brightness, this already bore these Gnostic imprints, and this is what Sholem is referring to here. So Sholem traces the symbolic and mythological vocabulary to these Eastern sources that are basically, I saw someone in the chat say it's Manichaean dualism. That's exactly what Gershom Scholem is arguing, that there's this cosmic separation. And he suggests that the Kabbalistic tradition itself had already become a vehicle for transmitting Gnostic ideas long before the Christian humanists had encountered it. So I don't want to get too off track here with the with all of that, but I just wanted to show you that this is the cosmology of this system that the Catholic humanists were syncretizing in Renaissance humanism, and that with the help of the popes spreading this disgusting heresy. Okay, and so this gets into Adam Kadmon a little bit. So Gershom Scholem also noted how the graduated emanations of the divine substance that proceed from the Ein Sof through the 10 Sephirot are analogous to the Valentinian Plimera. There you go. With its 30 aeons emanating through the unknowable Bythos, the cosmic anthropos of Kabbalah, Adam Kadmon. So again, Saint Irenaeus goes into detail about this whole anthropos. So when he's writing against the Gnostic heretics, when he's talking about the anthropos, that is essentially the same as Adam Kadmon. It occupies the same position in the system that the anthropos of Sethian and Basilidian Gnosticism occupies. And then you have in modern Jewish scholarship, they debated for a good century whether these resemblances reflected either a direct Gnostic borrowing in the formation of Kabbalah, which is what Scholem argued early on, or that there was a parallel development from like these shared Near Eastern sources. This is what Moshe Idel argued. So you still have these competing schools within Kabbalistic scholarship. Moshe Idel, by the way, was a student of Gershom Scholem. But what's not debated is that, the fathers confronted Valentinius and Basilides in the 2nd century would have absolutely recognized this Kabbalistic system as the same Gnostic cosmology. And this is what Pico imported into the 15th century. So that, yeah, again, you can look at the St. Irenaeus for like, he goes into detail about the emanationist cosmology. So how did the popes respond to that? Like, what was the, let's get into a little bit on like how this went over with the papal authority. So let me switch back to the text here. I hope you guys are enjoying this because I feel like I'm just getting a little too in the weeds with things. So I hope you guys are following. And thank you for tuning in. Like, to spend your Saturday night doing this is commendable. Yep, exactly. The end idea in Kabbalism is that you are a god viewing yourself, which is a perversion of theosis, which is why the religion of the Antichrist, it takes theosis and twists it into pride, self-will, and prelate. Yeah, it's apotheosis. Yeah, it's literally the inverse of theosis. Yeah, I 1,000% agree. It's a perversion of theosis. And actually, maybe I can find... Sorry, I have so many texts here. I have like all the stack of books next to me. I have all these PDFs. But there is something, I think, in... maybe it's in Hoffman where he talks about... I didn't even get into this because it's a little... I think this is coming up. But we're going to get into the hermetic frescoes in the Borgia apartments, because that's pretty revealing of this whole notion of apotheosis being, this encapsulating the efforts of the Renaissance humanists and even the Pope himself. Where are we here? There's no denying that Pico, with Italian Medici backing, forged the symbiosis of Judaism and Catholicism by founding the tradition of Christian Kabbalah, an oxymoron if there ever was one. He did so under the direction of his handler, the aforementioned Guillermo Raimondo de Moncada, the enigmatic Judaic convert to Catholicism, who was known by his alias Flavius Mithridates. Oh, so it's Mithridates. I never knew his full name there. Yeah, so okay, that was from Mithridates. Let's find I think it's back here. Okay. I don't have everything highlighted here. Okay. Oh, this is getting into the Hebraism and Judaizing, accusations of Judaizing, this in the Reformation. Okay, here's all right. I'm gonna keep this bookmarked because I think this is what I was looking for. I should probably go to Yates for this. Let me pull up Yates. Yates has a better description of this. In Giordano Bruno. What I'm looking for is the description of the Hermetic frescoes, but I have something pulled up if I can't find it anyway. Yeah, I'll keep this aside for now. So basically, this is how it went down. When Pico published his 900 thesis, it was condemned, or it was at least shut down. Like the debate and discourse surrounding it, like he was not allowed. He was prohibited by the Pope to hold his public debate. So you see, like, basically how I would summarize like how this occurred on the papal level. Like, how was this allowed to spread? There was also like a dialectical tension there, because there was both approval and then kind of like a hesitation or a back and forth with like condemnation and approval or revision or something. And so Pico's prevented from defending his thesis by Pope Innocent VIII when he suspended the event, and instead launched an investigation against Pico to examine his work for heresy. And in order to defend his positions, Pico responds with an apologia, and this just ends up, deepening and accelerating the controversy. So the following year, the Pope issues a papal bull which condemns all 900 theses as those renovating the errors of pagan philosophers, cherishing the deceits of the Jews, and devoted to magical arts, which is like, okay, based, right? And this was the first case in history of a printed book being universally banned by the church. It was Pico's 900 Theses, and almost all the copies were burned. So you're looking at this right now, and it's like, okay, correct response. Good job, papacy, okay? But here's what happens instead. Pico flees to France. He's arrested and briefly imprisoned before Lorenzo de' Medici bails him out, basically, and has him returned to Florence, where he continues his studies without any infringement. He's free to study under Medici protection. So this is where, again, you see that like kind of like mafia, like this early prefiguring of a mafia, essentially, with the Medici family. So the Medicis have papal protection. They're a banking family. They could essentially do whatever they want. So they decide Lorenzo de' Medici decides Pico is exonerated, even though he doesn't actually get exonerated by the Pope yet. And so Innocent's condemnation stands, but what happens is he dies, and then his successor, Alexander VI, who, like I said, was known as this occult pope, he was much more receptive of the occult arts, and he immediately exonerates Pico in 1493. So there you have both a papal condemnation, and then the successor exonerates him and undoes what the previous pope did to condemn him. So Pico's this is from Hoffman. Hoffman notes that Pico's papal absolution letter was included in all subsequent printed editions of his works, ensuring readers that they had received approval from the highest authority. So not only does Pope Alexander VI exonerate Pico, but he distributes in the printed versions of all of his works the papal absolution letter. So think about how that's received. It's like, oh, you open the book, and the first, like right there before you even get to the text, there's a papal absolution letter. That's wild. To like all that stuff that we just looked at, all that crazy demonic heresy. So Yates argues that Pope Alexander wished to proclaim his reversal of Innocent's policy by adopting Pico della Mirandola's program, using magia and Kabbalah as aids to religion. By the way, this is like another side note, but have you guys ever seen how there's multiple spellings of Kabbalah? Sometimes it's spelled Cabala, and then you have the more traditional spelling, which is Kabballah, and then sometimes you'll even see it spelled with a Q. Those are actually, I didn't know this until I started researching this, but those are actually distinguishing different types of Kabbalah. So Cabala is the Christian version of Kabbalah. That's what was appropriated in the Renaissance. So a lot of these academic works you'll read about Renaissance Christian Kabbalah, it's spelled with a C, Cabala. And then the Kabbalah with the K is more known for like the Jewish version of like the Jewish mystical version of Kabbalah. So it's important to distinguish that what the Renaissance Christian Kabbalists were doing, it cannot be considered the same as Jewish Kabbalah. Pretty much any honest scholar is saying, like, even on the side of like Western esoteric scholars, some Christian scholars that have covered this, and Jewish scholars, they all make a point to say that there is a distinction between Jewish and Christian Kabbalah that was appropriated in the West. Then the version with the Q is like the Blavatskyan type of Kabbalah. That's more of like the, Crowleyan version of theosophy. But anyway, you have yeah, that's right. Yeah, Q. Yeah, that's right. That's a good way to put it. Q is Hermetic, K is Talmudic. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So this is where we get into these frescoes. So let me pull this back up and I'll read this off here, because this is pretty wild. And this is to prove how into the occult Pope Alexander VI was. So we're going to go back here. Sorry, again, there we go. So what we're looking at here, this isn't the fresco, it's these here. So these were commissioned, these frescoes that are in, to this day, you can find these frescoes in the Borgia apartments in the Vatican. These frescoes were commissioned by Pope Alexander VI. He commissioned Pinturicchio, famous Renaissance painter, to depict these Hermetic frescoes. Among other things, there were other biblical depictions that are, largely, at least in the Western sense, not anything too questionable. But among them are these this series that I'll describe here. And this was, I believe Hoffman and Yates both ascribed this to like an occult stamp of approval, basically, from the Pope himself by commissioning these frescoes in the Vatican. The most striking depictions are found in this, it's called the Room of the Saints. That's what, it's just a picture of it somewhere here. Anyway, yeah, you could look up pictures of this. It's like a whole room that has all these frescoes, but this series is found in the Room of the Saints, it's called, which is unironically named that, based on a series of scenes that glorify Egyptian mystery religion. So it starts with a scene of Mercury killing Argus with a drawn sword. And then Mercury is identified as, in the Hermetic context, as Hermes Trismegistus himself, who Ficino asserted killed Argus before going to Egypt to give the inhabitants their laws and letters. And then following this depiction of Mercury and Argus is a depiction of Io, who is an Egyptian deity that escaped and became the goddess Isis. So that's the one here. So this is Isis sitting on a throne and instructing Hermes, who's at her right. So this is Hermes here, I believe. And then Moses on her left. So you have Moses on one side, Hermes Trismegistus on the other, and then Isis sitting in the throne. This is in the Vatican. So this was commissioned by a pope. This pagan, Gnostic Egyptian mystery religion fresco. The series then culminates in a triumphant procession where the bull is elevated in a final metamorphosis of Apsis Osiris into the deification of the Borgia Pope himself. And that's what you see here I think this is the one. I'm not sure. I'm reading there from Yates, and so I don't know which images correspond with the series, but you have a bull there. And so it appears that this is where you just see this dialectical tension, right? Like the previous pope condemned all of this, and then once his successor steps in and undoes everything and actually goes further to approve all of it. You have, it's a little more nuanced than that. I mean, it didn't help that the Renaissance popes themselves were compromised by these, political considerations, and then there were largely, like, to be fair, they were pretty uncertain with how to even navigate these esoteric currents. Like, this was all new. So, they didn't really know, I'm not excusing them at all. Like, to get to this point is wild, but, they were pretty unfamiliar with this stuff. And, it's like, I think of Pachamama, right? Like, we just saw, like, the Pachamama thing recur, like, where I think it was Pope Leo went and did the whole Pachamama ritual now. So it's probably like something like that. Like, they just kind of like are not really knowing the depth and what they're getting into here in the way that these intellectuals that influenced it knew, and then, aside from that, there was so much like corruption among the Renaissance papacies, like, because you had let's go back to what Father Seraphim Rose said, right? He was talking about these competing papal families where you had the Medicis and the Borgias, almost like rival crime families, right? Almost like rival mafias. They were, killing each other up. There was poisonings. In fact, Pico himself, we know now through recent forensics that Pico himself was poisoned because he died young. He was like in his I think he was like 25 or something when he died. He himself was poisoned. So you had all these poisonings and stuff, like all this espionage. Like, this was all happening in the Renaissance. It's not just Operation Gladio. So yeah, there is a lot of aspects to it, but we're actually pretty close to closing out here. I mean, we could stop there. But there's another figure, Savonarola. Well, it's getting late here. This has gone a while. I don't know. Should we get into Savonarola? Because this was really interesting. He was another proto-Protestant figure, deeply apocalyptic. He came in and started trying to clean up this esoteric infiltration in the Catholic Church. And, I guess maybe I'll skip to it. But essentially, he was burned at the stake for heresy. Not because of all that, but he had all these eschatological speculations drawing from Giacomo Fiore's Age of the Spirit. That this is what prophesied the downfall of Rome. And so this guy Savonarola steps in and perceives, because he's so apocalyptic, he's almost like a Catholic version of like one of these, evangelical, charismatic prophecy grifters. And he actually remained pretty influential in these subsequent millenarian movements as well. And so he saw like the age of the Spirit as the downfall of Rome, and connected to this occult infiltration. So Hoffman when Hoffman's writing about Savonarola, it's kind of depicting him in almost this like heroic sense. And he also developed this proto-Protestant following that was called the Piagnoni, which was very influential, and increasingly political millenarian movements, and their opposition to the Medici family's despotism. So you see the kind of Protestant attitudes, right? So yeah, there was also a book burning in there with so it kind of makes you think Savonarola is kind of based, right? Because he comes in and he sees all these pagan antics, he calls them, and Medici's poisonous legacy that dominated the Florentine carnival season, which became almost like this LGBT pride parade type thing. Like there was all this degeneracy and like paganism and whatnot that was occurring in the Florentine carnival season. And so Savonarola steps in and has all these it's almost like Weimar Republic stuff. Like he comes in and he's like burning all these books and artwork and mirrors, cosmetics, right? Stuff that all these women were using or men too, probably. They were all publicly burned in this infamous bonfire called the Bonfire of the Vanities. And this was in February of 1497. So this is what closes out the 15th century. Not just this, though. Actually, I didn't even get into this. This is for another time at this point. But the whole Battle of the Books that I talked about a little bit in the last stream is super interesting because that's the bridge between the Renaissance and the Reformation. And that was all it was a dispute over the printing of the Talmud and the Zohar. That we didn't get into Reuchlin. But Reuchlin was arguably more consequential in what he did, at least to influence the Protestant Reformation, because he was a renowned Hebraist, which Pico wasn't. So Reuchlin comes in and he has even more knowledge of Hebrew and Kabbalah than Pico, and he systematizes Christian Kabbalah even further especially with what he calls the pentagrammatron. So he takes the tetragrammatron and he inserts an S in it and spells out Yehoshua, I think it is, or Yehashua, something like that, which you hear all these Judaizers today even use. They're like how they insist on calling Jesus Yeshua. That's what Reuchlin was known for. Was he further systematized the hermeneutics by saying like, oh, see, you just add an S and then it spells Jesus right there. It's like that's the divine name in Hebrew, and so right there in the Kabbalistic letter formulation in the code, it's revealing Christ. Like that's what he argued. So, but Savonarola ends up. What happens to him? His initial prophecy. So he prophesies that the French King Charles VIII would soon scourge Rome, and that was believed to be fulfilled when the French invaded Italy in 1494. But then it becomes very obvious that there was no such scourge of the Catholic Church that occurred, or this New Jerusalem in Florence, which he prophesied. So he comes in. This is another thing you see with all these millenarian types. So it's very interesting how he represented like you see on one hand like the introduction of occultism and Kabbalah, starting this current of esotericism in the West that transmits later through millenarian movements and Protestantism. And then you see Savonarola, who comes along and is the opposition. He's like the only outspoken opposition to it. And he himself is like a proto-millenarian, because he comes in and he's prophesying that Florence would be the New Jerusalem, which is exactly what the Pilgrims said about the Massachusetts Bay Area when they arrived, that this was the New Jerusalem. And they said that about England. I believe in London, they ascribed it to a type of New Jerusalem. And so what you see instead is that Pope Alexander VI brings about this attempted reformation, because Hoffman refers to this as like an attempt at a reform. So it's another kind of allusion to like a proto-reform movement within the Catholic Church. But it's put to an end by Pope Alexander VI when he excommunicates Savonarola. And so in 1498, after a failed trial by fire and escalating political tension, Savonarola is then arrested, tortured brutally, hanged, and buried in the same location where the bonfire of the Vanities occurred a few years prior. So many of his followers then resume their campaigns for moral and political renewal and reform. They go underground with it, and they prevent the Medici return until 5 years before the Reformation, till 1512, when the Spanish troops then restore them by force. And then some of his followers, the Paganioni, they're called, they later convert to Protestantism. And then Luther, by the way, even praised them. He praised Savonarola and considered him a precursor to the Reformation. So Luther himself, according to, this is again according to Schaff, who is a Protestant historian, he notes that Luther himself considered Savonarola a precursor to the Reformation. As well as Reuchlin. But that's for another time. So thank you guys for tuning into this. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. You can go to my Substack for more work like this at thereversion.co, where you can see I'm live streaming there as well. Hello to 41 viewers there. Appreciate you guys all tuning in over on Substack as well. But yeah, you can find more of my work here, and for $9 a month, you can unlock the entire archive of 4 years of my research and publishing, all here. YouTube is just recent for me. I just started on YouTube about a year ago, actually coming up on my, it's actually pretty much my 1 year anniversary on YouTube. But this is where, if you want to go deep, come here and become a paid supporter, and you can unlock all kinds of crazy research that's similar to what I presented here. And you can get access to my upcoming article series that's going to pretty much be the published form of my book that I've been writing for the past year on this stuff. So what I presented tonight is like mostly within the first chapter of this book, because again, you can't really talk about the Protestant involvement in this transmission unless you first understand how it even entered Christendom in the first place. So I hope that gives you guys some context. Now you know where it all started. But thank you all for hanging out with me. I hope you had a wonderful Saturday night. Go to Divine Liturgy tomorrow. And we'll see you on the next stream, where we'll go a little softer on the next stream. We'll do something more fun. I try to balance things out so it's not all super educational heavy, but yeah, I appreciate that you guys enjoyed this. So we'll see you next time. Thank you to everyone who donated. I appreciate all of you, especially our top guy, there. Sorry, I'm pulling up the the donations. You guys know who you are. I'm tired and retarded right now. Oh, and let's go. We got Tony in the chat too. I really enjoyed Tony's stream last night, man. I was like, how did I never see this before? And at risk at glazing him too hard, I'm going to just say, go subscribe to Hello Listener, the MP3, Tony, our boy Tony. Make sure you go support his channel, because it's probably the coolest thing I've seen anyone do on a live stream. It completely mogs my visuals, and it's awesome. And he's an awesome musician. I was vibing out to the music. Here I am glazing him, as I said I wasn't going to, but yeah, it was awesome, man. Cool. All right, see you guys next time. I'm yapping too much.
Your stomach calling? Need a processed